Good evening everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight to share this new adventure of Lieutenant Columbo. Your loyalty touches us deeply, and we hope this story will lull you to a peaceful and restful sleep. Before we begin, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our stories, and give us a chance to encourage us to continue this work we love so much. Your comments are also invaluable to us. Tell us what you think of this investigation, and above all, share your ideas. Which detective would you like to see again? Which character fascinates you? Your suggestions inspire us. Now, make yourselves comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and let yourselves be carried away by this new investigation where Columbo will discover that sometimes silence speaks louder than words. The late afternoon sun bathed Los Angeles in a golden light that transformed the downtown skyscrapers into shimmering monoliths. In the upscale Bel Air neighborhood, perched atop a hill with panoramic views of the city, stood the modernist villa of Richard Ashford, the celebrated film producer whose movies had garnered no fewer than 12 Oscars in the past 20 years. The house was an architectural marvel of white glass and steel with bold angles that seemed to defy gravity. Inside, everything exuded understated luxury and refined taste, contemporary artworks on the walls, Italian designer furniture, and a white marble floor that reflected the light like a mirror. That Friday evening, Richard Ashford was alone in his vast, glass-walled office on the top floor, gazing out at the city spread out below. At 62, he was at the peak of his career. His latest film, an ambitious historical epic, was in the running for 14 Oscar nominations. Studios were vying for his future projects. His reputation as a man of impeccable taste and unerring business acumen was legendary in Hollywood. Yet tonight, something disturbed Richard Ashford's usual serenity. In his hand, he held a brown envelope he had received by courier that very afternoon. An envelope with no return address containing a single photograph and a typewritten message. I know what really happened 25 years ago, midnight tonight. Come alone where everyone will know. The photograph showed a young man in his 20s smiling at the camera, standing in front of a small theater in Santa Monica. Richard recognized the face, of course. How could he have forgotten? It was Marcus Delacroix, his assistant director at the time, who had died tragically a quarter of a century earlier. Richard crumpled the envelope in his hand, his jaw clenched. After all these years, someone knew. Someone was going to destroy everything, his career, his reputation, his carefully constructed life. He looked at his watch, 11:15 p.m. He still had 45 minutes before the meeting indicated in the message. An abandoned warehouse near the Long Beach port. 5 minutes to decide what to do. But Richard Ashford hadn't reached the top of Hollywood by letting others dictate his decisions. He had a plan, one he'd developed years before in case this day came. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a small .38 revolver he kept for personal protection. He slipped it into the pocket of his cashmere jacket, grabbed his car keys, and left the villa without a backward glance. At midnight, Richard Ashford was discovered in the abandoned Long Beach warehouse by two patrolling police officers who had noticed his Mercedes parked in front of the building. The producer was lying on the dusty concrete floor, a bullet in his chest, his rebel hand in his hand. Next to him, a handwritten note: "I can no longer live with what I've done. Marcus, forgive me." Lieutenant Columbo arrived on the scene at 1 a.m. His old Peugeot, a stark contrast to the brand new police cars. He got out slowly, adjusting his wrinkled raincoat despite the mild September night, and approached the security checkpoint where Sergeant Wilson was waiting. "Lieutenant," Wilson said, saluting him. "We have an apparent suicide. Richard Rashford, the film producer. Bullet in the chest, gun nearby, suicide note." "Richard Rashford," repeated Columbo, pulling out his worn notebook. "The guy who produced that film, what was it called again, with the gladiators, Empire of Shadows?" "Oscar, that's it. My wife wanted to see it, but I fell asleep in the theater. Too long for me." Columbo scribbled something in his notebook. What was he doing in an abandoned warehouse? "No idea. His wife says he left the house around 11 p.m. without saying where he was going. She thought it was odd but wasn't worried. Apparently, he sometimes stayed out late to think, driving aimlessly." "I see. And the suicide note, what exactly does it say?" Wilson handed him a plastic bag containing the note. Columbo read it carefully, his eyes narrowing. "I can no longer live with what I've done. Marcus, forgive me. That's all. No signature. No, just that." Columbo entered the warehouse, walking slowly around the body that the forensic technicians were still photographing. He observed the position of the body, the location of the weapon, the blood stain that had formed under the victim's torso. "Tell me, Sergeant," he said without looking up from the body. "Have you ever seen someone commit suicide with a bullet to the chest?" "Not often. Most shoot themselves in the head." "Exactly. Because it's faster, safer. A bullet to the chest, even to the heart, you can remain conscious for several minutes. It was a painful, slow death, not exactly the kind of choice one would make for suicide. Maybe he wanted to suffer. The note mentions guilt. Maybe." Columbo crouched near Ashford's right hand. There was gunpowder residue on his hand. "The technicians will test it, but probably." "The gun was right there." "Right there," Columbo repeated. He stood up with a slight grunt and walked over to where the revolver had been found, about 2 meters from his hand. "You know, it's funny. When someone shoots themselves, usually the gun falls right next to them, not 2 meters away." Wilson frowned. "You think it wasn't suicide?" "I don't think anything. I'm just asking questions." Columbo walked around the warehouse, observing the dusty windows, the old crates stacked in the corners, the tire tracks on the floor. "There's only one car outside, Ford's. So either he came alone, or someone else left in another vehicle." "The note mentions Marcus. Do you know who that is?" "Not yet, but I'm going to find out." Columbo stopped by a window and looked out toward the illuminated harbor in the distance. "You know what bothers me most?" "What?" "The silence. A man like Richard Rashford, used to the spotlight, to speeches, to interviews, and his suicide note is 3 lines long. No explanation, no justification, just forgive me, Marcus. People who commit suicide, especially famous people, they usually leave long letters. They want to explain, to justify themselves, to say goodbye. Maybe he had nothing else to say. Or maybe, said Columbo slowly, turning back to Wilson, someone else wrote that note for him. A suicide that doesn't look like a suicide, a note that's too short, a gun too far from the body, and a mysterious name, Marcus. Columbo sensed something wasn't right, and he was about to discover that sometimes silence speaks volumes. The next morning, Columbo went to Hashford's villa in Bel Air to question the widow. Sarah Hashford was a woman of 50, elegant and composed despite the circumstances, dressed in a black Chanel suit and pearls that had probably cost more than Columbo's car. She received him in the large living room with its bay window overlooking Los Angeles, a glass of mineral water in her hand. Mrs. Hashford began, Columbo, sitting on the edge of a white leather sofa that was probably worth her annual salary. I'm so sorry for your loss. I know this is difficult, but I have a few questions. Of course, Lieutenant, anything that might help. Her voice was calm, almost too calm for someone whose husband had just died. When your husband left last night, did he tell you where he was going? He just said he had to go out, that he needed to think. He did that often, going out late at night without saying where he was going. Richard was intense from time to time. When he was working on a project, he could be very preoccupied. He said that driving at night helped him clear his head. I see. And you didn't find it strange that he left at 11 p.m.? Tara hesitated for a fraction of a second. I was used to it. It didn't bother me anymore. Columbo took out his notepad and scribbled something. This note he left, it mentions someone named Marcus. Do you know who that is? Sarah's face froze imperceptibly. Marcus Delacroix was an assistant director who worked with Richard a long time ago, about 25 years ago. And what happened to him? He died. An accident on a film set. It was tragic. Richard never really got over it. What kind of accident? He fell from scaffolding during the night shoot of a scene. He died on his neck. The investigation concluded it was an accident. The scaffolding wasn't properly secured. And your husband felt responsible? Richard was the producer. He felt responsible for everything that happened on his sets. But the accident wasn't really his fault. It was negligence on the part of the technical crew. Columbo nodded, noting his information. One last thing, ma'am. Did your husband seem preoccupied these last few days? Nervous, different than usual? Sarah thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, yes. For about a week, he'd been more tense. He often looked at his phone as if he were waiting for a call or a message. And yesterday, he received a courier delivery that he was visibly disturbed by. Do you know what it was? No. He took the envelope and locked himself in his office for an hour. When he came out, he looked distraught. Did you see that envelope? No. Richard probably took it with him or destroyed it. Columbo thanked her and left the villa. In his car, he sat for a moment, lost in thought. A mysterious envelope, a distraught man, an apparent suicide in an abandoned warehouse, and at the heart of it all, a name. Marcus Delacroix, dead. 25 years ago. He started his Peugeot and drove to the LAPD archives. After 2 hours of searching through dusty old files, he found the accident report concerning Marcus Delacroix. The 24-year-old, a promising assistant director, had died on September 15, 1998, on the set of the film Moonless Night, produced by Richard Rashford. The accident had occurred around 3 a.m. Marcus had climbed a 15-meter scaffold to supervise the lighting for a night scene. The poorly secured scaffold collapsed. Marcus died instantly from a head injury. The investigation concluded it was an accident. The set's head of security, a man named Thomas Brenner, had been fired and sued by Marcus's family. He received a suspended sentence for negligent homicide. Columbo noted Thomas Brenner's name and continued reading. But it was a marginal note in the report that really caught his attention. It had been added by the detective who had led the investigation at the time, a now retired Carl Morrison. Something didn't add up. The victim's sister, Julie Delacroix, insisted that her brother would never have climbed unsecured scaffolding. He was notorious for his excessive caution regarding safety. She claimed it was murder, not an accident, but there was no evidence to support her claim. Case closed. Columbo slowly closed the file. A sister screaming murder. An accident that was too convenient. And now, years later, the producer responsible for the film died with a suicide note mentioning the victim. He pulled out his cell phone, a device he hated using but which his wife had insisted he carry, and called Sergeant Wilson. "Wilson, this is Columbo. I need you to find 2 people for me. Thomas Brenner, the former head of security who was fired after Marcus Delacroix's accident, and Julie Delacroix, the victim's sister. I want to speak to them today." Thomas Brenner lived in a small apartment in V, now working as a security guard at a shopping center. Columbo found him at his home late in the afternoon. A man in his 50s with a weathered face and tired eyes. "Mr. Brenner," said Columbo after introducing himself. "I know it's been a long time, but I'd like to ask you some questions about Marcus Delacroix's accident." Brenner obviously didn't. "Why now? Was it 25 years ago?" "Because Richard Rashford died last night, apparently by suicide. And his note mentions Marcus." Brenner sat heavily on his worn sofa. "Horde is dead. My God, you knew him well." "I worked for him. For 10 years, I was head of security on all those sets until that terrible night." "Tell me what happened." Brenner took a deep breath. "We were shooting a night scene. Marcus was supposed to be supervising the lighting from scaffolding. I'd checked the scaffolding myself a few hours earlier. It was perfectly secure. But when Marcus climbed up, it collapsed as if someone had deliberately loosened the bolts. Do you think it was intentional? I was never able to prove it. But yes, I do think so." Those bolts don't just loosen themselves in a few hours. Someone sabotaged them. Who would want to kill Marcus? Brenner hesitated for a long time. You have to understand. Marcus was brilliant, ambitious, talented, but he was also uncompromising. If he discovered something wrong, he'd report it. No matter the consequences. What had he discovered? I don't know exactly. But in the weeks before his death, he was tense. He told me he'd discovered something serious about Hashford. Something that could destroy his career. He said he was going to reveal everything after filming. But he never got the chance. No. And I was the perfect scapegoat. My career was destroyed. But you know what's funny? Hashford paid me a lot. He said it was to help me through the legal proceedings, but I think it was to buy my silence. Your silence about what? About what I saw that night. Just before the accident, I saw Hashford alone by the scaffolding for about 10 minutes. Then he left. 20 minutes later, Marcus climbed the scaffolding and fell. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place, an accident that might not have been an accident at all, a young man who had uncovered a dangerous secret, and 25 years later, the silence was finally broken. But by whom, and why now? The next day, Columbo met Julie Delacroix at a Santa Monica cafe near where her brother had once worked. She was a woman in her mid-20s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that bore the weight of 25 years of unresolved grief. "Lieutenant Columbo," she said, clutching her coffee cup tightly. "When your sergeant called to tell me Hashford was dead, I thought I was finally going to get some answers. My brother deserves justice." "Madame Delacroix, you always believed your brother's death wasn't an accident. Why?" Julie took an old photograph from her bag and placed it on the table. It showed a smiling young man standing near scaffolding on a film set. "That's Marcus 3 days before he died. Look what he's wearing." Columbo examined the photograph. Marcus was wearing a safety harness and a helmet. He was very careful, obsessively careful. After seeing a stuntman seriously injured on his first job, Marcus never took any risks. He checked everything himself 3 times. The idea that he would have climbed onto unsecured scaffolding is absurd. "So you think someone sabotaged the scaffolding?" "I'm certain of it. And I think that person was Richard Hashford." "Why would Hashford have killed your brother?" Julie took an envelope from her bag. "Because Marcus discovered something a week before his death. He sent me this letter." "Read it." Columbo carefully unfolded the letter. "Johnny, by the time." The handwriting was energetic and youthful. "Dear Julie, I'm writing to you because I've discovered something terrible and I want someone else to know in case anything happens to me. Richard Rashford didn't produce Moonless Night with his own money as he claims. He used dirty money laundering for a Mexican drug cartel. I've found the documents that prove it. Millions of dollars from drug traffickers invested in the film, laundered through the production. I'm going to reveal everything to the authorities after filming. Rashford can't get away with this. But I'm being careful. I'm keeping the proof safe and not telling anyone else. If you read this letter after I die, you'll know why I died. I love you, Marcus. Columbo reread the letter twice. Did you show this to the police at the time? Of course, but they said it was just accusations without proof. Marcus talked about documents he'd hidden, but they were never found. Without physical evidence, it was just my word against that of a powerful and respected film producer. And you never found those documents? No, I looked everywhere: his apartment, his office, even his locker at the theater where he taught. Nothing. Either Hashford found them and destroyed them before I did, or Marcus hid them so well that no one ever found them. Columbo closed his notebook thoughtfully. Madame Delacroix, have you sent Hashford a letter recently, or a courier? No. Why? Because Hashford received something by courier that he was upset about just before he died. I wonder if it was you. It wasn't me. But Julie hesitated. There's someone else, another who knows the truth. Who? Daniel Ortega. He was Marcus's best friend. They studied film together. Daniel was on set that night. After Marcus died, he completely disappeared from Hollywood. I haven't seen him in 25 years. Do you know where he is now? The last time I heard of him, he was teaching film at a small university in San Diego, but that was 10 years ago. Columbo jotted down the name. Thank you, Madame Delacroix, you've been a great help. Back in his car, Columbo called Wilson. I want you to find Daniel Ortega, former assistant on the film Moonless Night, probably in the San Diego area. Wilson called back hours later. I found him, Lieutenant. Daniel Ortega, 52, film professor at the University of San Diego. But there's something interesting. He took a leave of absence last week for personal reasons. Last week, Columbo murmured. Exactly when Hashford started to get nervous. Find me his address, I want to talk to him today. Daniel Ortega lived in a modest apartment near the university campus. When Columbo knocked on his door around 6 p.m., no one answered. He knocked again, harder. Mr. Ortega, this is Lieutenant Columbo from the LPD. I need to talk to you. Silence. Columbo tried the handle. The door was unlocked. He opened it cautiously and entered. The apartment was in an unusual state of disarray for a university professor. Books were scattered, papers were on the floor, and drawers were open. Someone had searched the place recently. Mr. Ortega. Columbo moved through the apartment, his hand near his service weapon as a precaution. He passed the kitchen and then the living room. The bedroom was empty as well. It was in the study that he found him. Daniel Ortega was sitting at his desk, his head bent forward, motionless. On the desk in front of him were an empty bottle of whiskey, and a flask of the sleeping pill bottle was also empty. And a typed note. I can't live with what I did anymore. I should have spoken up 25 years ago. I should have told Marcus the truth about what Hashford did, but I was afraid. Now Hashford is dead. I no longer have a reason to remain silent, but I also lacked the courage to live with what I didn't do. Forgive me. Columbo approached and checked the area. Nothing. Daniel Ortega had probably been dead for several hours. He immediately called emergency services and the local police, then examined the scene while waiting for them to arrive. Everything seemed to point to suicide: the sleeping pills, the alcohol, the note. A man consumed by guilt who finally chose to end it all. But something bothered Columbo. He looked at the note more closely. Typed like the one found near Cashford's body. He examined the typewriter on the desk, an old Remington. Then he noticed something strange. The note mentioned Hashford's death. Now that Hashford was dead, Columbo had checked with the coroner. Daniel Ortega had been dead for at least 12 months, maybe longer, which meant he was probably dead before Hashford committed suicide. How could he have written a note mentioning Hashford's death if he was already dead himself? Unless someone else had written the note. Someone who knew about Hashford's death. Someone who wanted to make it look like suicide. Columbo took out his phone and called Wilson. "I need you to do something for me. Check if anyone used a credit card or withdrew money in Ford's name after midnight yesterday, and also check the security cameras at the warehouse and on the surrounding roads. I want to know who else was there last night." Because now Columbo was certain of one thing: Richard Hashford hadn't written his own suicide note, and Daniel Ortega probably hadn't written his own note either. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who killed in the name of a 25-year-old silence. 2 deaths in 2 days. 2 flimsy suicide notes and a truth buried for a quarter of a century finally surfacing. But who was desperate enough, or determined enough, to kill to protect the secret? The next morning, Columbo summoned all the potential suspects to the station. Sarah Hashford arrived first, accompanied by her lawyer. Thomas Brenner came next, looking nervous. Julie Delacroix arrived last, her eyes red, suggesting she had cried upon learning of Daniel Ortega's death. Columbo made them wait in separate interrogation rooms while he reviewed the latest information Wilson had gathered. "What do we have?" he asked the sergeant. Wilson consulted his report. The surveillance cameras near the warehouse footage shows 2 cars arriving around 11:30 p.m. Ford's Mercedes, which we know, and a gray Honda Civic registered to Sarah Horford. "The woman," Columbo murmured. "She said she was home all evening." "She lied. The cameras show her arriving 15 minutes after Hashford. She stayed for about 20 minutes and then left." And for Daniel Ortega, the credit card statements show Hashford used his credit card at a gas station near San Diego at 8 p.m. last night, 3 hours before his supposed death in Los Angeles. So Hashford went to San Diego before going to the warehouse, Columbo said thoughtfully. He went to see Ortega, maybe to shut him up, or maybe, Wilson suggested, someone used his card after killing him to create a false trail. Possible. What else do we have? The toxicology reports. Daniel Ortega had a lethal dose of sleeping pills in his system mixed with alcohol. But there was something else too: traces of GHB, the date rape drug. Someone drugged him before giving him the sleeping pills. So it wasn't suicide. Definitely not. Someone murdered him and staged it as a suicide. Columbo nodded, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place in his mind. And Hashford, the gunpowder residue on his hand. That's where it gets interesting. There was residue, but not the right kind. Ballistics experts say the residue doesn't match the weapon found at the scene. Someone put residue on his hand, probably by firing a shot with another weapon near his hand after he died. So Hashford didn't commit suicide either. He was murdered, and someone staged it as a suicide. Columbo stood up. I think it's time to talk to Mame Hashford. In the interrogation room, Sarah Hashford sat stiffly in her chair, her lawyer beside her. When Columbo entered, she looked at him with a defiant expression. Mrs. Hashford, Columbo began, sitting down opposite her, you told me you were home all Friday evening. That's correct. So how do you explain your car being seen on the security cameras near the warehouse where your husband died? The lawyer immediately interrupted. Lieutenant, my client. No, Sarah said, holding up a hand. It's fine, I'll answer. She looked Columbo directly in the eyes. Okay, I was there. Richard called me, distraught, saying he'd received a threat and needed to meet someone. I was worried, so I went with him. And what did you see? When I arrived, Richard was already dead. He was lying on the floor, blood everywhere. I panicked. I left. I know I should have called the police, but I was afraid. Afraid they'd think I'd killed him. Did you see anyone else? Sarah hesitated. There was another car leaving as I arrived. I couldn't see who it was in the dark. What kind of car? A dark sedan, maybe a Toyota, I'm not sure. Columbo nodded, noting his information. Mrs. Hashford, what do you know about Marcus de la Croix? Sarah's face hardened. Only what Richard told me, an assistant who died in an accident a long time ago. Did your husband tell you about what Marcus discovered about the money laundering? I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, said Columbo softly. I think you know exactly what Marcus discovered, and I think you know your husband killed him to protect his secret. The question is, did you kill your husband for the same secret? Or for some other reason? The lawyer stood up abruptly. This interrogation is over. My client will say nothing more without it. It was the money, Sarah said suddenly, ignoring her lawyer. You want to know why I was here? Because if Richard confessed to what he did, everything would be seized. The house, the bank accounts, everything. 25 years of a luxurious life would vanish. I couldn't let that happen. So you killed him? No, I told you, he was already dead when I arrived. Columbo stared at her for a long moment, then stood up. Thank you for your candor, Mrs. Hashford. Don't leave town. In the corridor, Wilson was waiting. What do you think? I think she's telling the truth, Columbo said. She was there, but she didn't kill her husband. Someone else did. Someone who was driving that dark sedan. Thomas Brenner drives a gray Toyota Camry. I know, that's why I want to talk to him now. Thomas Brenner was sitting in the interrogation room, his hands trembling slightly. When Columbo entered, he looked up, his eyes filled with fear and guilt. "Mr. Brenner," said Columbo, sitting down. "Do you want to tell me something?" Brenner remained silent for a long moment, then collapsed. Okay, I was there. I killed Hashford, but it wasn't premeditated, I swear. Tell me what happened." "Daniel Ortega contacted me weeks ago. He told me he'd finally found the evidence that Marcus had hidden the money laundering documents. He wanted to go to the police, but he was scared. He wanted me to go with him, to testify as well. And I said yes, but then I panicked. If all this came out, I'd be implicated too. I'd accepted Hashford's money to keep quiet. I'd be accused of being an accessory, of obstruction of justice. Law justice. My life would be ruined. So, what did you do?" "I contacted Hashford. I told him Daniel had the evidence and that he was going to reveal everything. I just thought, I don't know what I thought, that maybe Hashford could convince Daniel to keep quiet, or that he could work something out. But Hashford decided to kill Daniel." Brenner nodded, tears now streaming down his cheeks. "I didn't know. I swear, when I found out Daniel was dead, that he'd staged his suicide, I knew it was Hashford, and I realized I was next. He couldn't leave me alive knowing what I knew. So, you killed him." "I sent him an anonymous letter telling him to meet me at the warehouse. I just thought, I don't know, scare him, confront him. But when he arrived and saw me, he pulled out a revolver. He was going to kill me. So we fought, and the shot went off. I didn't want to kill him, but it was him or me. And you staged a suicide. I was scared. I knew no one would believe self-defense. So I took his phone, drove to San Diego to use his credit card and create a false trail. Then I came back and staged the suicide. I thought everyone would believe he killed himself out of guilt." Columbo nodded slowly. "And the note, you wrote that?" "Yes, on a typewriter I bought at a second-hand store, the same one I used for Daniel's note." "Wait," said Columbo, straightening up. "Daniel's note? You killed Daniel Ortega too?" Brenner stared at him, confused. "What? No, I thought Ford killed him." "But you just said you used the same typewriter for both notes." "No, I only wrote Ashford's note, not Daniel's." Columbo and Brenner stared at each other, the same realization hitting them simultaneously. There was someone else, someone who had killed Daniel Ortega, someone who had used a similar typewriter, someone who was still out there. 3 dead, 3 murderers, or was someone orchestrating all of this from the beginning? Columbo felt he was still missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, and that piece would change everything. Columbo went back to his office and spread all the pieces of the puzzle out on his table: the suicide notes, the autopsy reports, the crime scene photos, the witness statements. Something still didn't add up. Thomas Brenner had confessed to killing Ashford, but who had killed Daniel Ortega? Ashford was already dead when Daniel was killed. So who? Lieutenant Wilson entered the office. I have something. I checked Ashford's phone records, as you requested. The day he received the mysterious envelope, he made 3 calls. One to his wife, one to his lawyer, and one to a number that hasn't yet been identified. Determined to find out who this number belongs to, Wilson returned 10 minutes later. It's a prepaid phone bought 2 weeks ago at a store in Santa Monica, paid for in cash. It's impossible to trace the buyer. Santa Monica. Columbo murmured, where Marcus Delacroix used to work. He sat up suddenly. Julie Delacroix, where is she now? She's gone back home to Santa Monica. Why? Because I think she's been playing us all from the start. Minutes later, Columbo knocked on the door of Julie Delacroix's apartment. She opened it, surprised to see him. Lieutenant, there's news. May I come in, Ms. Delacroix? Of course. Columbo entered the modest apartment. He immediately noticed an old Remington typewriter on a desk in the corner, exactly the same model as the one found at Daniel Ortega's house. Nice typewriter, Columbo said. They're rare these days. Julie followed his gaze. It belonged to my brother. I kept it after he died. Why? The suicide notes, Ashford's and Ortega's, they were typed on machines like this. Old Remingtons. There are thousands of them in LA, Lieutenant. That's true, but here's the interesting part. Daniel Ortega was killed before Ashford. Yet his suicide note mentions Ashford's death. The only way that could be possible is if the person who wrote the note knew Ashford was going to die because they had orchestrated everything. Julie remained silent, her face turning to stone. You sent that envelope to Ashford, Columbo continued. A picture of your brother and a threat. You wanted to scare him. You knew he would contact Daniel Ortega, the only other living witness from that night. You knew they would meet. You can't prove it. You went to San Diego. You killed Daniel and staged a suicide. Then you waited. You knew Thomas Brenner would contact Ashford. You planted the seed by talking to him. You knew Brenner was afraid that he'd do anything to protect himself. You orchestrated their confrontation. Why would I do that? For revenge, Columbo said simply. Not just against Ashford, but against everyone who had helped cover up your brother's death. Daniel, who kept quiet by buying him off, Brenner, who had accepted money to keep quiet. You wanted them all dead, but you also wanted them to suffer first, to be afraid like your brother must have been that night. Julie sat down slowly on the sofa, her mask of grief finally falling to reveal something harder, colder. He screamed, she said flatly. That night, when the scaffolding collapsed, Marcus screamed. I was on the phone with him just before. He said he was finally going to reveal the truth. Then I heard the noise, the spit, his screams, and then silence. Silence. Columbo repeated softly. For 25 years, that silence haunted me. For 25 years, I watched Ashford live his life of luxury, accept awards, be celebrated while my brother rotted in a grave, forgotten. So, you decided to break the silence. When I discovered that Daniel had finally found the ordeal Marcus had hidden, I knew the time was right. But I didn't just want Hashford to go to prison. I wanted him to suffer, to be afraid, to know what it's like to wait for death. You killed Daniel Ortega in cold blood. Daniel was a coward. He could have saved my brother's reputation years ago. But he kept quiet out of fear, out of opportunism. He deserved to die. And Brenner, I thought he would kill Hashford and then commit suicide out of guilt, or that Hashford would kill him and go to prison. Either way, justice would be served. Columbo nodded sadly. Madame Delacroix, I have to arrest you for the murder of Daniel Ortega. Julie stood calmly, wrists pointing for the handcuffs. Silence finally spoke, Lieutenant. After 25 years, the truth has come out. My brother can finally rest in peace. Perhaps, said Columbo, putting the handcuffs on her. But at what cost? A week later, all the pieces of the puzzle had fallen into place. The documents Marcus had hidden were finally found in a locker at the Santa Monica bus station. Julie had left the key in Daniel's apartment for the police to find. The evidence confirmed everything: the money laundering, Hashford's complicity, Marcus's murder. Thomas Brenner pleaded self-defense for Hashford's murder and received a reduced sentence. Sarah Hashford was never charged. Her presence at the scene was circumstantial, and she had committed no crime other than being mentally present. Julie Delacroix was tried for the murder of Daniel Ortega. Her lawyer pleaded temporary insanity, citing 25 years of accumulated grief and rage. The jury was lenient, recognizing mitigating circumstances, and received a sentence of 15 with the possibility of parole. After 10 years, Columbo attended the trial, observing this woman who had orchestrated such an elaborate, patient revenge. Leaving the courthouse after the verdict, he stopped to speak to her one last time. Madame Delacroix, he said, I just have one question. How did you know everything would turn out exactly as you planned? Julie smiled sadly. I didn't know, Lieutenant. But sometimes when you keep quiet long enough, when you observe and wait, the perfect moment arrives. Silence isn't empty, you know. It's full of possibilities. You just have to listen. The day the silence spoke, Columbo murmured. Exactly. Driving home that evening, Columbo thought about the case, about Marcus Delacroix, who had died 25 years earlier with a secret he never had the chance to reveal, about all those who had died since, some from revenge, others from fear, others from guilt. You know, he said to his wife when he got home, sometimes the best kept secrets aren't the ones you actively try to hide. They're the ones no one dares to say out loud. And when someone finally finds the courage to break that silence, it changes everything. His wife handed him a cup of hot tea. Another case was solved. Yes, but this one taught me something. That silence can be as dangerous as a lie, perhaps even more so. So, dear listeners, that's how this story ends. The day silence spoke, revealing secrets buried for a quarter of a century and proving once again that Columbo knows how to listen to what others don't hear. I hope this investigation has captivated you and will lull you to a peaceful sleep. If you enjoyed this adventure with Lieutenant Columbo, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us what you thought of this story, and if you'd like to help us continue creating these wonderful stories for you, you can support us through YouTube Super Thanks. There's no obligation, no amount required. Simply give what your heart tells you to if you are able and willing. But even if you cannot or do not wish to contribute financially, your presence here tonight, your attentive listening, and any likes you might leave on this video are already invaluable gifts to us. Thank you so much for being here. Good night everyone. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and remember, sometimes silence speaks volumes. See you very soon for a new story. M.